When I opened the front door that Thursday in March, I immediately sensed something was wrong. The silence was strange, heavy, as if the house itself were warning me of what I was about to discover. I had lived in that house for 42 years since marrying my late husband Robert in 1982. I knew every sound, every creak of the floorboards, every shadow the afternoon light cast in the living room. But in that moment, everything felt strange and hostile. I climbed the stairs to my room where I'd left my things that morning before heading out for my routine doctor's appointment. My 68 years weighed on my legs as I climbed each step, but it wasn't physical exhaustion that bothered me. It was a feeling that something terrible awaited me upstairs. When I pushed open the door to my room, which was always left ajar, it swung wide open, revealing a completely empty space. My bed, where I had slept for decades, was gone. The oak dresser that had been my mother's, containing all my jewelry and important documents, was gone. My wardrobe, filled with clothes I had collected over a lifetime, was simply gone. The flowered curtains I had sewn myself, the family photographs on the wall, my books, my medications, everything was gone. The room was completely empty except for a few marks in the carpet where the furniture used to be. I stood in the doorway for a few minutes trying to process what I was seeing. My heart started pounding and I felt dizzy, forcing me to lean against the doorframe. I thought I might be having some kind of episode, that maybe my blood pressure had changed after the doctor's appointment. I closed my eyes and opened them again, hoping everything would return to normal, but the room was still empty. It was then that I heard heavy footsteps coming up the stairs. I recognized the sound immediately. It was my 43-year-old son, Michael, who had moved back home after his divorce 6 months earlier. I had agreed to have him move back in with me because I thought he needed support during this difficult time in his life. After all, he was my only son, and as a mother, I always believed it was my duty to help him when he needed it. Michael appeared in the hallway carrying a cardboard box in his arms. When he saw me standing in the doorway of the empty room, he didn't even look surprised. In fact, there was something on his face I'd never seen before. It was a cold, almost cruel expression that made me question if I truly knew my own son. "It's not your house anymore, old lady." He said these words with a coldness that cut deeper than any physical insult could have. His voice was calm, controlled, as if he'd practiced this phrase many times before confronting me. "Your things are in garbage bags in the garage. You have until tomorrow to pick them up." I was speechless for a few seconds. The reality of what was happening hadn't yet fully sunk in. I tried to process the words my son had just spoken, but they seemed like they belonged to some nightmare I couldn't wake up from. Michael, the same boy. I'd rocked to sleep for years, the boy I'd taken to school every day, the boy I'd supported through college by paying all his tuition, was calling me old and kicking me out of my own home. "Michael, what's going on here?" My voice was shaky and weak. "Where are my things? Why did you do this? I don't understand what's happening." He set the box down and looked at me with an expression that mixed impatience and contempt. "Mommy, you need to understand that things have changed. This house is mine now. Dad left me as the primary heir in his will, remember. You only have the right to live here as long as I allow it. And I don't allow it anymore." Those words hit me like a punch in the gut. It was true that my husband had left the house in Michael's name in his will, but that had been a decision he'd made with the expectation that I would live there for the rest of my life. Robert had explained that it was a matter of taxes and estate planning, and that it would be better for the family this way. I had agreed because I trusted him as much as I trusted our son. I never imagined that this decision could be used against me. "But Michael, this has always been my home too. I've lived here for over 40 years. Your father never wanted me to be homeless. We agreed that you would inherit the property, but that I could live here until I died. You remember that conversation, don't you?" He gave a dry, bitter laugh that made me shiver. "Mommy, you're getting senile. Dad died 2 years ago. Things have changed a lot since then. I need this house to start my life over. I'm getting married again, and my fiancé is moving in. There's no room for you in this new setup." It was the first I'd heard about this mysterious bride. During the 6 months Michael had lived with me after the divorce, he'd never mentioned dating anyone, much less planning a new marriage. I'd noticed he'd go out some nights and come home late, but I'd assumed he was just having fun as a single man. I never imagined he was planning a whole new life from which I'd be excluded. Who is this bride, Michael? Why haven't you ever told me about her? If you're getting married again, I'd like to meet her. Maybe we can find a solution that works for all of us. This house is big enough to accommodate a new family. Michael shook his head with growing impatience. No, Mom, you don't understand. Chelsea doesn't want you living here with us. She said it would be too strange and uncomfortable to start a new marriage with her mother-in-law, living in the same house. And I agree with her. It's time for you to find your own place. The name Chelsea sounded completely foreign to me. I had no idea who this person was who had seemingly made important decisions about my life without even knowing me. The idea that a complete stranger had influenced my son to kick me out of the house was almost impossible to accept. Michael, you can't do this to me. This has been my home for over 40 years. I raised you in this house. I took care of your father when he was sick. I paid the bills when you were in college. How can you just throw me away like trash? Your things aren't trash, Mom. They're neatly packed in bags in the garage. You can pick them up tomorrow. I'm being more than fair. I could have just changed the locks while you were gone and been done with it. The coldness in his voice was something I had never experienced before. This wasn't the Michael I knew. The Michael I had raised was kind, caring, respectful. This man standing in front of me felt like a stranger wearing my son's face. I began to wonder if I had truly been such a terrible mother to deserve this treatment. And where do you expect me to go, Michael? I'm 68 years old. I don't have enough income to rent a decent apartment. My pension barely covers my medical expenses. You know that. He shrugged with a nonchalance that left me breathless. That's not my problem, Mom. You're an adult. You need to find a solution. Maybe you can live with Aunt Susan or some of your friends from church. Or maybe it's time to consider a nursing home. The mention of a nursing home made me feel like the ground had dropped out from under me. I was a completely independent woman running my own home, driving my own car, and managing my own finances. The idea of being sent to an institution as if I were some kind of burden was humiliating beyond anything I could have imagined. Michael, please, let's talk about this like adults. We can certainly find a solution that works for everyone. I promise I won't interfere with your life with Chelsea. I can even move into the basement bedroom if that helps. I just need a place to live until I get my act together. No, the answer was final and definitive. Chelsea has already decided how she wants to decorate this house. She has plans for every room. There's no place for you here, Mom. You need to accept that and move on. It was at that moment that I realized this decision hadn't been made impulsively. Michael and this mysterious Chelsea had planned this carefully. They had discussed my life, my future, my housing without even consulting me or giving me the opportunity to participate in the conversation. I had been treated like an inconvenient object that needed to be removed. Where is she now, this Chelsea? I'd like to speak to her directly. Maybe we can reach an understanding between women. Michael shook his head again. She doesn't want to talk to you. In fact, she specifically asked not to get involved in this situation. She said it would be too dramatic and complicated. So this conversation is between you and me, and I've already said everything I have to say. The realization that I was being rejected by someone who didn't even want to get to know me was devastating. My entire life, I had resolved conflicts through communication and dialogue. I always believed that any problem could be resolved if people sat down and talked honestly. But here was my own son telling me that his new partner didn't even want to give me that opportunity. Michael, I don't understand how we got to this point. We've always been close. When you divorced Amanda, I took you in without question. I cooked for you, did your laundry, supported you emotionally. How can you just forget all of that, Mom? I appreciate everything you've done, but that doesn't mean I owe you the rest of my life. I need to think about my future now. Chelsea is young, she has energy, she can give me the children Amanda never could. I can't let the past get in the way of my future. This revelation hit me like a bolt of lightning. Michael was marrying a younger woman who could give him children. Suddenly, everything began to make more sense. I wasn't just a practical inconvenience. I was a reminder of his age, of his past responsibilities, of a phase of life he wanted to leave behind. Chelsea represented a new beginning, and I represented the past he wanted to forget. How old is she, Michael? That Chelsea? 28? And before you make any comments about the age difference, I want you to know that we truly love each other. She makes me feel young again. She makes me forget all the problems and failures I've had in the past. 28 years old? She was 15 years younger than my son and 40 years younger than me. Suddenly, I understood why she didn't want an elderly mother-in-law living in the same house. I would be a constant reminder of reality of her new husband's age, of the responsibilities that come with a relationship with a middle-aged man. Michael, you're definitely making the right decision. Relationships with such large age gaps can be complicated. And kicking your own mother out of the house for a woman you've only known for a few months may be something you'll regret. Her eyes narrowed, and for the first time during our conversation, I saw real anger on her face. It's not just a few months, Mom. We've known each other for almost a year. And don't give me relationship advice. You and Dad had a lukewarm, passionless marriage. You've just tolerated each other. With Chelsea, I found true love for the first time in my life. Those words about my marriage to Robert cut me deeply. We had been married for 40 years when he died, and while our relationship wasn't perfect, it was built on love, respect, and mutual commitment. Hearing my son describe our marriage as warm and tolerant made me question whether I had truly known my own husband or if I had been naive about my son's perception of our family. Your father and I loved each other, Michael. We might not have had the dramatic passion seen in the movies, but we had something solid and lasting. We built a life together, raised you, faced hardships side by side. That, too, is love. Maybe it was love for you, but it's not the kind of love I want for myself. I want passion. I want excitement. I want to feel truly alive. Chelsea gives me all of that. And if that means I have to make some difficult changes in my life, then that's what I'll do. At that moment, I began to understand that this wasn't really a discussion about housing or practical convenience. This was a discussion about identity, about who Michael wanted to be, about how he wanted to see himself. And apparently the version of himself he wanted to embrace didn't include an elderly mother as part of the package. Where did you meet this Chelsea, Michael? How did you two meet at work? She works in the company's marketing department. She's smart, ambitious, and has big plans for the future. She inspires me to be a better version of myself. So she works with you. This means you'll get married and she'll move into a house that used to belong to her coworkers. This won't create an awkward situation at the office. Michael seemed irritated by my question. Mom, stop trying to find problems where there aren't any. Chelsea and I are professionals. We know how to separate our personal and professional lives. Besides, she'll probably transfer to another department after we get married. I began to realize that Michael had thought through every detail of his new future with Chelsea except for how it would affect me. He had planned the wedding, the housing, even the professional implications, but he had treated me like an inconvenient detail to be resolved at the last minute. This made me feel completely invisible in his life, despite having been the most constant and supportive person throughout his 43 years. Michael, I need time to process all of this. You can't just show up and kick me out of the house in one day. I need to find a place to live, organize my things, figure out my financial situation. Can you give me at least a week, 3 days? You have 3 days to find another place and move your stuff out of the garage. Chelsea and I want to start decorating the house this weekend. 3 days to find a new life at 68. 3 days to leave the home where I had built a family, where I had cared for a sick husband, where I had created memories that would last a lifetime. 3 days to accept that my only son had chosen a woman he had known for a year over the mother who had loved him all his life. We went down to the kitchen together, where Michael poured himself a glass of water as if nothing extraordinary had just happened. I sat at the kitchen table, the same table where we'd shared thousands of meals as a family, and tried to process the enormity of what I'd just discovered. My entire life had changed in a matter of minutes. Michael, can I at least see my things in the garage? I need to make sure everything is there, especially my important documents and medications. Sure, but don't take too long. Chelsea will be here in a few hours, and I'd rather you weren't here when she arrived. We walked together to the garage, where I found my entire life packed into black garbage bags. There were at least 20 bags, some torn at the sides, revealing bits of my clothing and personal belongings. Some of the bags were wet underneath apparently because they had been placed on the garage floor where there had always been a small leak that Robert had never fixed. I opened some of the bags to check the contents, and my heart broke at how my most precious possessions had been treated. My clothes had been carelessly tossed into the bags with delicate items mixed in with dirty shoes. My jewelry, including my wedding ring and the pearl earrings that had belonged to my mother, was tossed into a bag along with cosmetics that had leaked and stained everything around them. Michael, you couldn't have been more careful with my things. Some of these pieces are very special to me. Sorry, Mom. I was in a hurry. Besides, you can wash and clean everything when you get to your new place. I found my jewelry box at the bottom of one of the bags and quickly checked to see if all my most valuable pieces were there. To my relief, everything seemed to be there, although some chains were tangled and needed repair. I continued searching for my important documents, birth certificate, insurance documents, medical papers, financial records. Where are my important documents, Michael? I didn't find them in any of these bags. Oh yes, they're in my room. I thought it would be best to keep them safe until you have a fixed address to take them to. The idea that my son was holding my personal documents made me extremely uncomfortable. Without these documents, I couldn't prove my identity, access my bank accounts, or deal with any legal issues that might arise. It was as if he were holding me hostage in a very subtle but effective way. Michael, I need my documents. How can I rent an apartment or handle banking matters without them? You can pick them up once you have a confirmed address. This is just a precaution to ensure they don't get lost during your move. I realized in that moment that Michael was exerting control over me in a way I had never experienced before. He wasn't just kicking me out of my house. He was placing me in a position of total dependence on him. Without my documents, without my housing, without adequate time to organize myself. I was completely at the mercy of his decisions and timing. I spent the next few hours calling friends and family trying to find someone who could help me with temporary housing. My sister Susan, whom Michael had mentioned, lived in another state and was dealing with her own health issues. Most of my friends were people my age who lived in small apartments or nursing homes unable to accommodate a long-term guest. I called my former church where I had been an active member for over 20 years, hoping someone in the community could offer me guidance or temporary support. Pastor Johnson was friendly and understanding, but explained that the church didn't have resources for long-term housing assistance. He gave me some numbers for local charities, but warned that the waiting list for subsidized housing was several months long. Meanwhile, Michael continued to act as if nothing out of the ordinary was happening. He watched television in the living room, made work-related calls, and even started moving some furniture around, apparently preparing the house for Chelsea's arrival. The casualness with which he handled the situation made me question my own sanity. Was I exaggerating the severity of what was happening that first night? I lay down on the living room couch because I no longer had a bed to sleep in. Michael had locked the door to my old room, saying Chelsea wanted to start decorating and didn't want anything disturbed. I lay awake most of the night staring at the ceiling and trying to understand how my life had fallen apart so quickly. The next day, I started making more serious calls about housing. The apartments available on the rental market were all beyond my financial reach. My Social Security retirement combined with the small pension I received from the company where Robert had worked totaled about $2,200 a month. One-bedroom apartments in the area cost at least $1,800 a month, not including utilities, which would leave me with very little for food, medicine, and other essential expenses. I visited 3 nursing homes in the area just to get a sense of my options. They were all depressing in different ways. The first was clean but institutional, smelling of disinfectant, and had residents sitting in hallways staring into space. The second was more cozy but obviously expensive, with a 2-year waiting list. The third was affordable but in deplorable condition, with overworked staff and facilities that looked like they hadn't been maintained in decades. I returned home that second day feeling completely defeated. Michael was in the kitchen with a young woman I immediately recognized as Chelsea. She was exactly as I'd imagined, blonde, tall, well-dressed, with the kind of confidence that comes with youth and beauty. When she saw me enter, she looked at Michael as if I were an intrusion in her own home. "Hi, you must be Michael's mom. I'm Chelsea." She extended her hand politely, but there was a coldness in her eyes that confirmed everything. Michael had told me about his position regarding my housing. Nice to meet you, Chelsea. I'm Margaret. I hope we can talk about the current situation and perhaps find a solution that works for everyone. Chelsea exchanged a look with Michael before answering. Actually, Margaret, Michael told me you're already getting ready to move in. We're so excited to start our life together in this house. I have so many redecorating ideas. The way she talked about redecorating as if my presence were merely a temporary obstacle to her design. Plans made it clear to me that any emotional appeal would be futile. This woman had made up her mind about me before she even met me, and nothing I could say would change her mind. Chelsea, this house has been my home for over 40 years. I understand that you want privacy as a new couple, but surely we can find a way to coexist until I can find my footing elsewhere. She shook her head with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Margaret, I really need to start fresh, you know? This will be my first home as a married couple, and it's very important to me that it's truly ours. I'm sure you understand. The word fresh deeply irritated me, as if 40 years of family life, love, memories, and history were something dirty or outdated that needed to be erased so their new life could begin. As if I were a stain that needed to be removed so the house could truly be theirs. Michael remained silent throughout this exchange, letting Chelsea speak for both of them. This made me realize he had completely abdicated any emotional responsibility for the situation, shifting it to his new partner. It was easier for him to see me as an obstacle to Chelsea's desires than as his mother being unfairly treated. That night was even worse than the first. Chelsea stayed for dinner and they chatted animatedly about their plans for the house, the wedding, and the future, as if I were invisible. I overheard Chelsea commenting on how she wanted to transform my old bedroom into the perfect office with white walls and modern furniture. She talked about how she wanted to tear down the wall between the living room and dining room to create a more open, contemporary space. Each word was like a knife plunging into my heart. She was talking about physically destroying the home I had known and loved for decades. It wasn't enough to remove me from the property. She wanted to remove every trace of the life that had been built there before her arrival. It was as if she wanted to erase my existence from the house entirely. On the third and final day of Michael's ultimatum, I woke up knowing I needed to take decisive action. I could no longer trust that the situation would resolve itself or that Michael would change his mind. Chelsea had made it clear that her tolerance for my presence had run out, and Michael had demonstrated that he was completely under her influence. I went to the office of a lawyer I had met through church, hoping he could give me some legal advice about my rights as a longtime tenant or as a relative of the landlord. The lawyer, Mr. Patterson, listened to my story sympathetically, but explained that legally I had little recourse, since the house was in Michael's name and I wasn't paying formal rent. I was considered a guest who could be evicted at any time. However, Mr. Patterson mentioned that there were some organizations that helped elderly people in precarious housing situations, and that I might qualify for some kind of emergency assistance. He gave me a list of contacts and said he would make some calls on my behalf to see if he could expedite some help. I returned home with a small hope that perhaps there was a solution I hadn't considered. But when I arrived, I found Michael and Chelsea packing the last bags of trash in the garage, apparently preparing to move them off the property. There was also a furniture store truck parked in the driveway, and two men were unloading what appeared to be a new bedroom set. Michael, what's going on here? I thought I had until the end of the day to resolve my situation. Mom, Chelsea found a perfect furniture set on sale, and they couldn't deliver until today. We needed to clear the room immediately. Your bags are all here in the driveway. You can come pick them up anytime. Seeing my entire life reduced to trash bags piled in the driveway while new, expensive furniture was carried into the house I'd lived in for decades was one of the most humiliating moments of my entire life. The delivery drivers passed me by as if I were just another obstacle to be overcome, carrying pieces of furniture that would cost more than I'd earned in several months of retirement. Chelsea oversaw the delivery with obvious enthusiasm, directing the men on where to place each piece and commenting on how perfect everything would be once the complete redecoration was complete. She was literally building her new life on the ruins of mine, and she seemed to be having a blast in the process. At that moment, I made a decision that would change the course of the entire situation. Instead of continuing to beg or try to appeal to the conscience of people who clearly had none, I decided I needed to fight for my rights in a more formal and definitive way. I called Mr. Patterson immediately and explained that the situation had become even more urgent. He told me to come to his office immediately with any documentation I had proving my residency in the house. Fortunately, I still had some electricity and phone bills in my name that had been sent to the house over the years, as well as some medical correspondence that proved my long-time ADDRESS. Mr. Patterson carefully reviewed my documents and explained that, while my legal situation was complicated, there was precedent for cases where elderly people were summarily evicted by family members. He said he could file an emergency motion for a temporary restraining order allowing me to return to the home until a court could fully review the facts of the case. Margaret, I need to be honest with you about your chances. Your son technically has the legal right to decide who lives on your property. But there are laws that protect elderly people from summary eviction without due process, especially when they have established long-term residence. Let's argue that you do have de facto tenant rights even without a formal lease. He explained that the case could take a few weeks to fully resolve, but that an emergency hearing could be scheduled for the next few days. During that time, if we could get the temporary restraining order, I could return home while the case was decided. It was a small hope, but it was more hope than I had felt in 3 days. We spent the rest of the afternoon preparing the necessary documentation. Mr. Patterson asked me several questions about my life in the house, my financial contributions over the years, and any evidence I could provide regarding my established residence. Fortunately, I had some records that I had paid certain bills for the house during periods when Robert was unemployed, and there were medical records showing the house as my address for decades. Mr. Patterson also asked me about my financial situation and whether I had the resources to handle a prolonged legal battle. I explained that my income was limited, but that I had some savings I had set aside for emergencies. I never imagined the emergency would be having to sue my own son, but apparently that was exactly what was happening. That night, I stayed in a cheap motel on the outskirts of town, surrounded by the garbage bags that had held my entire life. The room smelled of cigarettes and disinfectant, and the carpet was stained from decades of use by temporary guests. It was a stark contrast to the comfortable home where I had slept for 42 years, but at least it provided a roof over my head while I waited for my court hearing. I spent hours in that motel room sorting through my possessions, trying to separate the essential from the sentimental. I found family photographs that had been carelessly tossed into one of the bags, some of them bent or damaged. There were pictures of Michael as a child, smiling innocently at birthdays, graduations, and family holidays. It was difficult to reconcile that happy, loving boy with the cold man who had thrown me out of my home. The next day, Mr. Patterson called with good news. He had managed to schedule an emergency hearing for the following day, and the judge had agreed to consider a temporary restraining order. He instructed me to arrive at court an hour before the hearing to review our arguments and prepare my testimony. When I arrived at the courthouse the morning of the hearing, I was nervous but determined. I had chosen my most conservative and professional attire, wanting to make the best possible impression on the judge. Mr. Patterson met me on the courthouse steps and quickly reviewed what I should expect during the proceedings. "Michael, you should understand that your son will likely also have legal representation," he explained to me. "They will argue that as the owner of the home, he has the absolute right to decide who can live there. Our job is to convince the judge that you have established residency rights that cannot be summarily revoked, especially considering your age and circumstances." When we entered the courtroom, I saw Michael sitting across the room with a lawyer who looked much more expensive and experienced than Mr. Patterson. Chelsea sat behind him, dressed professionally, obviously, trying to make a good impression. She avoided eye contact with me, but I could tell she was nervous despite her composed appearance. The judge entered the room, and I immediately recognized his face, though I couldn't immediately place where I'd seen him before. He was a middle-aged man with graying hair and a serious expression that conveyed authority and experience. There was something familiar in his eyes, but I was so focused on the hearing that I couldn't fully process the feeling of recognition. Judge Thompson, as I read from his desk identification, quickly reviewed the case documents before beginning. He first heard Michael's attorney's arguments, which were exactly what Mr. Patterson had anticipated. The attorney argued that Michael was the legal owner of the property and had absolute rights to decide who could reside there, especially considering that I didn't pay rent and had no formal lease. When it was my turn to speak, Mr. Patterson led me to the witness stand where I swore an oath to tell the truth. I began to tell my story, explaining how I had lived in the house for 42 years, how I had cared for the property and contributed to its upkeep, and how I had been summarily evicted with only 3 days' notice. As I spoke, I noticed Judge Thompson listening to me with increasing attention. His eyes narrowed slightly as if he were trying to remember something important. When I mentioned my full name, Margaret Elizabeth Harrison, I saw a flicker of recognition cross his face. "Miss Harrison," the judge interrupted me gently, "may I ask if you worked at the City General Hospital between 1995 and 2010? "Yes, Your Excellency. I worked as an administrator in the Human Resources Department for 15 years before retiring." The judge was silent for a moment, clearly processing this information. Then he leaned forward, and his expression completely changed from formal to personal. "Ms. Harrison, do you remember a young lawyer named David Thompson who worked as the hospital's general counsel in the late 1990s? My heart began to beat faster as memories flooded back. David Thompson had been a brilliant young lawyer hired to handle the hospital's legal matters, but he had run into trouble when he was falsely accused of professional misconduct by a jealous colleague. I had been one of the few people who believed in his innocence and had provided crucial evidence that proved his version of events. Yes, I remember David very well. He was falsely accused of violating patient confidentiality by Dr. Richards, who was trying to hide his own incompetence. I provided the records that proved David never had access to the information he allegedly leaked. Judge Thompson, who I now realized was the same. David Thompson I had met years ago smiled for the first time during the entire hearing. "Ms. Harrison, if it weren't for your courage in coming forward and providing this evidence, my legal career would have ended before it even began. You literally saved my professional career." A murmur ran through the courtroom. People realized there was a significant personal connection between the judge and the plaintiff. Michael's attorney looked visibly uncomfortable, likely realizing this revelation didn't favor his client. Michael and Chelsea exchanged worried glances, seemingly understanding that the dynamics of the case had drastically changed. "Your Excellency, I remember you as a very upstanding and hardworking young man. I'm delighted to hear that you've built such a successful career in law. You've always seemed to have a strong sense of justice." Judge Thompson nodded graciously, but then resumed his professional demeanor. "Ms. Harrison, while I owe you a great personal debt, I must conduct this hearing impartially and based solely on the legal facts. However, I can say that your reputation for integrity and honesty certainly influences the credibility I attribute to your testimony." He then addressed Michael's attorney with a much more stern expression. "Mr. Williams, your client is here today. I would like to hear directly from him about the circumstances that led to the eviction of a 69-year-old woman who had resided for over 4 decades in the property in question." Michael was called to the witness stand, and it immediately became clear that he was unprepared for judicial scrutiny. Under oath, he was forced to admit that he had given me only 3 days' notice to vacate the house, that he had packed my possessions into garbage bags, and that his primary motivation was to accommodate his new fiancée who objected to my presence. "Mr. Harrison," Judge Thompson said, his voice thick with disapproval, "was the property in question left to you in your father's will with the understanding that your mother could continue to reside there for the rest of her life?" Michael hesitated, clearly uncomfortable with the question. "Well, Your Excellency, this has been discussed, but circumstances have changed. I need to move on with my life, and my new fiancé has specific needs for our life together. And do those needs include summarily evicting an elderly woman who raised you and cared for this property for decades? The judge's question was loaded with moral judgment, and Michael began to stutter his answer. I mean, we offered alternatives. We suggested she look for other relatives or perhaps a nursing home, Judge. Thompson then addressed Chelsea directly, who had been called as a witness. Ms. Williams, were you aware of Ms. Harrison's housing situation when she began her relationship with Mr. Harrison? Chelsea looked extremely uncomfortable under the judge's piercing gaze. Yes, Your Honor, I knew his mother lived in the house. And at any point did you consider a solution that would allow coexistence until alternative arrangements could be made in a more humane way? Chelsea looked at Michael before answering, clearly seeking guidance. Your Honor, I felt it would be best for everyone if we began our marriage in complete privacy. I thought it would be best for Mrs. Harrison to also find a place that was truly hers. Chelsea's answer was clearly rehearsed, but her hesitant delivery and the way she avoided eye contact made it clear to the court that her motivations were purely selfish. Judge Thompson made some notes on his papers before continuing. Miss Williams, do you have children? No, Your Excellency. Do you have living parents? Yes, I have. How would you feel if your parents were summarily evicted from their home of decades to accommodate the wishes of a person they had never met? Chelsea was silent for a long moment, clearly struggling to find a response that wouldn't make her seem completely insensitive. Finally, she murmured that she hoped we could find a more amicable solution. After hearing all the testimony, Judge Thompson announced a brief recess to consider his decision. During this time, I saw Michael and Chelsea talking intensely with their attorney, who seemed to be explaining that the situation wasn't going well for them. Michael kept looking at me with an expression that mixed anger and growing concern. When the court reconvened, Judge Thompson had a stack of papers in front of him and a very serious expression. He began by reading some legal precedents on long-term tenants, rights and protections for the elderly against summary eviction. Based on the facts presented today, he began, it is clear that Ms. Harrison established a de facto residence at the subject property for more than 4 decades. During that time, she contributed significantly to the maintenance and improvement of the property, established all of her community and medical ties based on that address, and was repeatedly assured that she could remain at the property for life. The judge went on to explain that while Michael was technically the legal owner of the property, the summary eviction of a long-term tenant, especially a vulnerable elderly person without due process or adequate time to find alternative housing, violated several legal protections. He then announced, I am granting a temporary restraining order allowing Ms. Harrison to immediately return to the property and reside there until a permanent and mutually acceptable solution can be negotiated. I am also ordering that all of Ms. Harrison's personal belongings be handled with care and returned to their original condition and location. The relief I felt was so intense that I began to cry right there in the courtroom. After days of humiliation, fear, and uncertainty, there was finally someone in authority who recognized that I had rights and dignity that deserved protection. Judge Thompson wasn't finished, however. Furthermore, he continued, I am ordering the parties to participate in mandatory mediation within the next 30 days to develop a long-term plan that protects Ms. Harrison's housing rights, while also addressing Mr. Harrison's legitimate needs as the property owner, Michael and Chelsea looked shocked and furious at the decision. Their lawyer was whispering furiously in Michael's ear, presumably explaining his appeal options. But the damage to their image had already been done. The entire courtroom had witnessed their selfish motives and their willingness to treat an elderly woman like disposable trash. Before closing the hearing, Judge Thompson made a final comment that echoed throughout the courtroom. Mr. Harrison, I hope you will use this time to reflect on the values your mother clearly tried to instill in Ms. Harrison demonstrated more integrity and compassion in a day's work 20 years ago than she has demonstrated in this case today. Justice is not just about legal rights, it is about basic human decency. the smug smile Chelsea had maintained throughout most of the hearing finally disappeared completely. She looked around the courtroom, seemingly realizing for the first time that everyone present was looking at her and Michael with a mixture of disapproval and disbelief. The reality that their names and behaviors would become public knowledge in the small community began to set in. After the hearing, Mr. Patterson explained to me exactly what the court order meant. I could return home immediately, and Michael was legally obligated to allow me full access to the house and restore my belongings. Any violation of the order would result in contempt of court, which could result in substantial fines or even imprisonment. "We'll get your things from the motel and take you back home," Mr. Patterson told me with a smile. "And Margaret, I want you to know it was an honor to represent you today. I've rarely seen justice served so clearly and definitively." When we arrived back at the house that had been mine for over 40 years, Michael and Chelsea were in the driveway, clearly discussing the day's events intensely. When they saw me arriving with Mr. Patterson, Michael approached with an expression of barely contained anger. "Mom, this isn't over. We're going to appeal this decision. You can't just use your old connections to steal my property." Mr. Patterson immediately intervened. "Mr. Harrison, your mother didn't use connections. She testified honestly about her situation, and the judge made his decision based on the law and the facts. Any attempt to intimidate or harass your mother will be reported to the court as a violation of the restraining order." Michael backed away, but the look in his eyes made it clear his anger was far from dissipating. Chelsea, on the other hand, looked more shocked than furious. She kept shaking her head as if she couldn't believe her carefully laid plans had been shattered by an unexpected legal turn of events. I spent the rest of the day reorganizing my belongings and restoring my room to its previous condition. It was emotionally exhausting work, not only because of the physical exertion, but also because of the realization of how much damage had been done in such a short time. Some of my most delicate clothes had been irreparably damaged by careless packing with leaking cleaning products. Several pieces of sentimental pottery had been broken during the hasty packing. But as I reorganized each item, I felt a growing sense of empowerment I hadn't experienced in years. For the first time since Robert's death, I had fought for something important and won. I had refused to accept unfair treatment and taken legal action to protect my rights. It was an intoxicating feeling of autonomy and self-defense. That night, Michael knocked on my bedroom door. When I opened it, he was standing there with an expression that mixed resentment and something that might have been regret. "Mom, we need to talk about how this is going to work. Obviously, we have to find a way to coexist until mediation resolves this situation permanently." "Sit down, Michael. I think it's time we had an honest conversation about what really happened here these past few days." He sat on the edge of my bed, avoiding eye contact. For a few minutes, we sat in silence, and for the first time since this crisis began, I could see traces of the boy I'd raised in the man sitting across from me. "Michael, I need you to understand something. This was never about me trying to control your life or interfere with your relationship with Chelsea. This was about you treating me like disposable trash after a lifetime of love and support." "I know, Mom," he said quietly. "I know I didn't handle this right. Chelsea was so excited about starting fresh, and I got carried away by her excitement. I didn't think about how you would feel. Michael, you packed my entire life into garbage bags. You gave me 3 days to find a new place to live at 68 years old. You denied me access to my own documents. These weren't impulsive decisions. They were deliberate choices to humiliate me and force me out of your life." He finally looked me in the eye, and I saw tears there that I hadn't seen since he was a child. "Mom, I messed up. I know that now. When I saw you in that courtroom today, when I heard the judge talk about how you helped his career, I remembered who you really are. You've always been the most upstanding person I've ever known, and I treated you like you were an inconvenience." It was the first genuine show of remorse I'd seen from him since this whole situation began. But I also knew that words alone couldn't undo the emotional damage that had been done. "Michael, I accept your apology, but you need to understand that our relationship has fundamentally changed. You've shown that you're willing to discard me when it's convenient, and that's something I'll never completely forget." "I know," he said. "I know I need to work to regain your trust. And I know Chelsea and I need to completely rethink our plans. Where is Chelsea now? She needs to be part of this conversation too if we're going to find a way forward. Michael hesitated before answering. Actually, Mom Chelsea went to her parents' house tonight. She said she needs time to think about everything that happened. I think today's hearing made her realize the situation is much more complicated than she had imagined. Over the next few weeks, the dynamic in our home changed dramatically. Chelsea rarely came to visit, and when she did, she was polite but distant with me. It was clear she realized her plans to start a marriage in a completely remodeled home free of family baggage weren't going to materialize as expected. Michael, for his part, seemed genuinely committed to repairing our relationship. He began including me in conversations about the house, asking my opinion on small changes he and Chelsea wanted to make. He also began contributing more to the household expenses, acknowledging that I had carried a disproportionate financial burden. During the months he lived with me after his divorce, during the court-ordered mediation, it became clear that the situation had forced Michael and Chelsea to completely reevaluate their relationship and future plans. The mediator, an expert in family conflict, helped all parties express their needs and concerns constructively. Chelsea admitted that she had pressured Michael to remove me from the house because she wanted to avoid any complications or difficulties in his new marriage. She acknowledged that she had not considered my feelings or rights in the situation, and that she had treated the issue as a simple logistical inconvenience rather than a complex human issue. During these sessions, it also became clear that Michael and Chelsea's relationship had been severely strained by the events of the past few weeks. The pressure of the court case, the negative publicity in the community, and the need to confront the moral implications of their actions had placed a significant strain on their romance. The final solution that emerged from mediation was more creative than either of us had originally imagined. Michael agreed to give me legal ownership of a portion of the house, specifically the ground floor and basement, while he would retain ownership of the second floor. This division would provide me with permanent housing security while also allowing privacy for both families. Additionally, Michael agreed to pay a monthly sum to help with household expenses, recognizing that I had contributed significantly to the property over the years and that my fixed income made it difficult to maintain a home alone. This financial solution would provide me with the financial security I needed, while also formally acknowledging my past contributions to the family. The agreement also included provisions for shared use of common spaces, like the kitchen and laundry room, with specific schedules to ensure there were no conflicts. While it was a more complex solution than the original situation, it offered legal protection and dignity I hadn't had before. Interestingly, as the weeks passed and the details of the agreement were finalized, Chelsea began to question whether she really wanted to get married and live in a house with such complicated living arrangements. During one of the final mediation sessions, she announced that she had decided to postpone the wedding indefinitely to reconsider whether she was ready for the complexities of marrying someone with significant family obligations. Michael was visibly shaken by this decision, but at the same time, he seemed almost relieved. In the months that followed, it became clear that the crisis had forced him to confront aspects of his personality and values that he had previously preferred to ignore. He began going to therapy to address issues of family responsibility and emotional maturity. 6 months after the court hearing, Chelsea completely ended the relationship with Michael, saying she realized she wasn't ready for the complications of a relationship with someone her age and family background. Although Michael was initially devastated, he eventually recognized that the relationship had been built on superficiality and perhaps wasn't meant to last. Today, almost a year after those terrible days in March, Michael and I have a more honest and respectful relationship than we've had in years. The crisis has forced us to confront issues we'd long avoided and to establish clearer boundaries around mutual expectations and responsibilities. Michael still lives in the house, but now as my roommate rather than my son who tolerates me out of convenience. He dates occasionally, but in a much more thoughtful and mature way than during his relationship with Chelsea. He's also become more involved in the community and developed a stronger sense of social responsibility. For me, the experience was transformative in ways I could never have anticipated. At 68, I learned that it's never too late to fight for your rights and dignity. I learned that even when those closest to you fail, justice is still available if you're willing to seek it. Most importantly, I learned that my worth as a person is not determined by other people's willingness to include me in their lives. I have inherent rights as a human being, as an elderly woman, as someone who has contributed to society for decades. These rights cannot be revoked for the convenience or whims of others, even when those others are close family members. The irony of the entire situation was not lost on me. Decades ago, when I defended David Thompson in the hospital, I never imagined that this action would return to save me in a time of desperate need. But this coincidence taught me something profound about how our acts of integrity and compassion create ripples that spread through time in ways we can never predict. If you identified with my story, please leave a like to help me reach more people who may be facing similar situations. In the comments, tell me if you've ever experienced something similar with family members trying to take advantage of you. And subscribe to the channel for more real stories like this, where we explore the complexities of family relationships and the importance of fighting for our dignity no matter our age.